Hey there, fellow truth seekers and curious minds. Welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the mysteries that challenge everything we thought we knew about history, spirituality, and the very fabric of our reality. Today I'm going to share with you one of the most mind-bending stories you've probably never heard of, the incredible tale of a dentist who claimed angels took control of his hands and typed out an entire 900-page Bible through him. Now, before you click away thinking this is just another wild conspiracy theory, stick with me, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question not just what you know about religious texts, but about the very nature of human consciousness and our place in the cosmic order. This isn't your grandmother's Bible story, folks. We're talking about a book that predicted scientific discoveries decades before they happened. Contains detailed accounts of lost continents that archaeology is only now beginning to confirm, and presents a view of creation so radically different from anything you've ever heard that it makes science fiction look like a documentary. So what makes this story so absolutely captivating? Well, imagine if someone in 1881, that's right, 1881, wrote detailed descriptions of planetary formation that wouldn't be confirmed by science until the 1900s and beyond. Imagine a text that describes the Earth's magnetic field and aurora phenomena with stunning accuracy, decades before we even knew these things existed. Picture a book that talks about multiple human species coexisting on Earth, long before anthropology discovered evidence of Neanderthals and other early human variants. This is exactly what we're dealing with here. The man behind this extraordinary work was John Ballou Newbrough. And let me tell you, his life story reads like something out of an adventure novel. Born on June 5, 1828, in a humble log cabin near Springfield, Ohio, John came into this world already marked by controversy. His mother, Elizabeth, was drawn to spiritualism, communicating with the dead, seances, all that mystical stuff that was becoming popular in the mid-1800s. His father, William, on the other hand, was having absolutely none of it. Here's where it gets really interesting. When young John started talking about receiving spiritual messages, we're talking about a little kid here, his stern father would actually whip him for it. Can you imagine? Your own child claims to be hearing from the spirit world, and instead of curiosity or concern, you respond with violence. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. Despite these harsh punishments, or maybe because of them, John's spiritual experiences only intensified as he grew older. John wasn't just some dreamy-eyed mystic, though. This guy was brilliant and ambitious. At just 16 years old, he was sent off to Cleveland to attend high school, boarding with a dentist's family and working as his assistant. He learned the dental trade while putting himself through school, eventually graduating from Cincinnati Medical College as a physician when he was only 21 years old. But here's the kicker. He was so sensitive to pain and suffering that he couldn't handle being a doctor. The sight of blood and his patient's agony was just too much for his empathetic nature. So what did he do? He switched to dentistry, figuring it would be less traumatic. Now, if you know anything about 19th century dentistry, you'll realize this wasn't exactly a pain-free career choice, but at least most of the blood stayed in people's mouths, right? But John Ballou Newbrough wasn't destined to spend his life looking into people's mouths. In 1849, when news of gold discoveries in California hit the East Coast like wildfire, our young dentist caught gold fever and headed west. And here's where his story gets even more remarkable. He actually struck it rich. This wasn't some get-rich-quick scheme gone wrong. Newbrough genuinely found gold and made serious money from it. But wait, there's more. Not content with just California gold, he teamed up with a Scottish friend named John Turnbull and sailed all the way to Australia to try his luck at the Ballarat goldfields around 1851. Can you picture it? This sensitive, spiritually inclined former medical student is literally traveling the world, living in tents, getting his hands dirty mining for gold in some of the most remote and dangerous places on Earth. It's like something out of a Hollywood adventure movie. When he finally returned to the United States in the mid-1850s, Newbrough was what we'd call today comfortable. Not exactly wealthy, but financially secure enough to pursue his real interests. He set up a dental practice in New York City and became actively involved with the New York Spiritualist Association, eventually becoming one of their trustees. Now, here's where his story takes that crucial turn toward the supernatural. Newbrough had always possessed what people called remarkable psychic gifts. We're not talking about parlor tricks here. Witnesses claimed he could paint in complete darkness using both hands simultaneously, could apparently read books in distant libraries just by closing his eyes, and could lift enormous weights under spiritual influence, supposedly even lifting a full ton without apparent effort. Whether you believe in this stuff or not, multiple credible witnesses documented these abilities. But Newbrough grew frustrated with the typical spiritualist communications of his day. Most chances involved dead relatives passing along mundane messages about the afterlife or earthly concerns. He wanted something deeper, more meaningful. He craved what he called metaphysical information, knowledge about the fundamental nature of reality, the structure of the universe, the true history of humanity. Around 1871, something extraordinary happened. Newbrough claimed he began receiving visits from much more advanced spiritual beings, not the usual departed souls, but what he described as angels from higher realms of existence. These entities told him they wanted him to perform a special mission for the Creator, but first he would need to prepare himself through a decade of purification. And here's where it gets really specific and interesting. These spiritual visitors gave him exact instructions. He had to become vegetarian, practice daily bathing, engage in regular self-improvement and introspection, and dedicate himself to serving others regardless of profit. For 10 solid years, from 1871 to 1881, Newbrough followed this regimen religiously. Think about what this means. In 1871, vegetarianism wasn't some trendy lifestyle choice. It was considered downright weird by most people. Daily bathing? In an era when most folks were lucky to wash once a week, this guy is taking daily baths as part of his spiritual preparation. The dedication required to maintain this lifestyle for an entire decade shows just how seriously Newbrough took these instructions. Then, around 1879, the angels told him to purchase something that had just been invented, a typewriter. Now understand, this was cutting-edge technology. The typewriter had only recently been patented and was still a novelty. Newbrough described it to others as a machine that writes by keys, like a piano. He spent over 2 years learning to use this contraption, though he admitted he never became particularly skilled at normal typing. But on one morning in early 1881, something unprecedented happened. Newbrough sat down at his typewriter about an hour before dawn, and suddenly a brilliant light struck both his hands. Without any conscious control, his hands began typing rapidly and vigorously for about 15 minutes. When he looked up, he saw the light extending from his hands like a telegraph wire toward the sky, and above his head were 3 pairs of fully materialized hands. Behind him stood an angel with her hands on his shoulders. The entity told him not to read what had been typed. Can you imagine the self-control that must have required? You're sitting there, your hands just typed for 15 minutes without your conscious direction, and you're told not to look at what you've written? But Newbrough obeyed, driven by what he described as religious fear of losing this incredible new power. For the next 50 weeks, that's nearly a year. This same phenomenon occurred every single morning. Like clockwork, about half an hour before sunrise, the light would appear, the spiritual beings would take control of his hands, and for approximately 15 minutes, they would type away at incredible speed. Newbrough never once looked at what was being produced until the very end. The weird thing is, he wasn't in a trance or unconscious state. He remained fully aware of his surroundings and maintained his personal identity throughout these sessions. He could see the angels working through him, could observe the light extending from his hands to the heavens, but had no control over what his hands were typing. It's like being a passenger in your own body while supernatural forces take the wheel. When the 50 weeks were complete, the angels finally told him to read what had been produced. What Newbrough discovered was a massive manuscript of over 900 pages containing what the entities claimed was a new Bible for the modern age. They instructed him to publish it under the title Oahspe, which they explained meant sky, earth, and spirit in an ancient language called Panic. But the content wasn't just typed text. The book also contained over 100 intricate drawings, maps, and symbols that Newbrough claimed were also produced through automatic drawing, but with a pencil instead of the typewriter. These weren't simple sketches. We're talking about detailed portraits of religious leaders, complex astronomical diagrams, maps of lost continents, and symbolic representations that resembled ancient hieroglyphs. So what exactly did these angels claim to be revealing through Newbrough's hands? Hold on to your hats, because this is where things get absolutely mind-blowing. Oahspe presents itself as nothing less than a complete alternative history of Earth and humanity spanning the past 24,000 years, along with a synopsis covering the previous 55,000 years. But this isn't just ancient history, it's cosmic history, describing how our planet and solar system move through different regions of the galaxy, encountering varying levels of what the book calls spiritual light that directly affects human consciousness and civilization. According to Oahspe, we're not the first generation of humans on Earth, not even close. The text describes multiple cycles of human development, with advanced civilizations rising and falling over millions of years. It claims our current season of human development began around 78,000 years ago with the creation of a being called Adam. But this isn't the Adam you know from Genesis. Here's where it gets really wild. Oahspe describes the original creation of modern humans as a genetic blending of animal man, basically early hominids, with materialized spiritual beings the book calls Etherians or angels. These angels literally took physical form and mated with primitive humans to create hybrid offspring with vastly superior spiritual and intellectual capabilities. This resulted in several distinct human races with dramatically different characteristics. The Ehins were small, gracile people with psychic abilities who could communicate directly with spiritual realms. The Druks were larger, more primitive beings with longer arms and shorter legs, essentially what we might recognize as Neanderthals. The Ewans were tall, copper-colored people who were basically the first truly modern humans, possessing both spiritual awareness and physical capabilities. Now here's what's absolutely mind-boggling about this. Remember, this was written in 1881, decades before anthropology discovered evidence of multiple human species coexisting on Earth. Yet Oahspe describes in detail the interbreeding between these different human types and explains how genetic research would eventually confirm these ancient mixing events. Modern DNA analysis has indeed found evidence of interbreeding between modern humans and Neanderthals, exactly as Oahspe described over 140 years ago. But the cosmic scope of Oahspe goes far beyond just human evolution. The book presents a detailed cosmology describing how planets and solar systems form through what it calls vortexes, basically cosmic whirlwinds that gather matter and energy to create celestial bodies. These vortexes supposedly determine not just physical characteristics of planets, but their spiritual and electromagnetic properties as well. Here's something that'll make your jaw drop. Oahspe described Earth's magnetosphere, that invisible magnetic field that protects us from solar radiation, more than 75 years before scientists discovered it existed. The book explains how this field creates the aurora borealis and describes its comet-like shape extending far beyond the moon on the night side of Earth. Scientists didn't actually map the magnetosphere's tail until satellites were launched in the 1950s and 60s. Yet Oahspe provided accurate details about this phenomenon in 1881. The book also presents a radically different version of the Great Flood story that challenges everything you think you know about Noah's Ark. According to Oahspe, there was indeed a catastrophic flood, but it wasn't caused by rain. Instead, it resulted from the sinking of an entire continent called Pan in the Pacific Ocean, approximately 24,000 years ago. This lost continent of Pan wasn't just some mythical Atlantis-type story. Oahspe provides detailed maps showing its triangular shape and describes its advanced civilization of millions of people. The book explains that the continent became spiritually corrupted, filled with cannibals and degenerate spirits, so it was deliberately sunk by higher spiritual powers as a kind of cosmic reset button. But here's the kicker. instead of one man building one ark to save two of every animal species, which, let's be honest, is physically impossible. Oahspe describes 138 ships built by the righteous inhabitants of Pan. These ships were constructed not on the water, but in valleys and on mountaintops, following specific instructions from angelic beings who knew what was coming. When the continent sank, approximately 12,420 people survived and were dispersed to different parts of the world, becoming the ancestors of various modern races. Think about the implications here. While the biblical Noah story describes 8 people repopulating the entire world, which is genetically impossible, Oahspe's version involves over 12,000 survivors with diverse genetic backgrounds spreading across multiple continents. This makes far more sense from both a practical and scientific standpoint. And get this, in recent decades, underwater archaeology has actually discovered massive stone structures and pyramids beneath the Pacific Ocean, particularly off the coast of Japan. These underwater ruins cover hundreds of square miles and show clear signs of advanced construction techniques. Could these be remnants of the lost continent of Pan that Oahspe described more than 140 years ago? But Oahspe doesn't just rewrite ancient history, it completely revolutionizes our understanding of spiritual realms in the afterlife. The book describes a vast hierarchy of spiritual worlds surrounding Earth, populated by the spirits of everyone who has ever died. These aren't vague, cloudy heavens. We're talking about organized civilizations with their own governments, technologies, and social structures. According to Oahspe, when you die, you don't immediately zoom off to some distant paradise or punishment. Instead, you wake up in spiritual worlds that exist right here around Earth, but at different vibrational frequencies. Your initial destination depends entirely on your spiritual development, your habits, your diet, and your level of service to others during physical life. The book describes multiple levels of these spiritual realms. The lowest levels are chaotic places filled with selfish, earthbound spirits who haven't learned to work together. These are the hells of various religions, not places of eternal punishment, but more like cosmic rehabilitation centers where spirits gradually learn to overcome their selfish tendencies. Higher levels are organized into vast communities led by advanced spirits called gods. But these aren't supernatural deities. They're simply humans who lived and died like everyone else, but who achieved such high levels of spiritual development that they've been appointed as administrators over these spiritual worlds. Even higher are the Etherian heavens, occupied by beings so advanced they can travel between star systems and manage entire galaxies. Here's what's really interesting about this cosmology. It explains why different cultures throughout history have had such different religious experiences. According to Oahspe, various gods, or advanced spirits, have periodically descended to Earth to establish religions suited to different peoples and time periods. Zarathustra, Buddha, Krishna, Moses, Jesus, all were supposedly inspired by different spiritual administrators working under the ultimate creator. But here's the twist. Oahspe claims that most organized religions eventually become corrupted by lower spiritual beings who set up false kingdoms in the spiritual realms, mimicking the true heavens but leading people astray. This is why the book is generally hostile toward established religious institutions while still acknowledging the original spiritual truths they were built upon. The book even provides detailed explanations of how spiritual beings can materialize physical forms and operate what we might today call UFOs or starships. According to Oahspe, these craft aren't vehicles from distant planets. They're interdimensional transportation devices used by advanced spirits to travel between spiritual realms and occasionally manifest in our physical world. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This all sounds pretty far-fetched. But here's what you need to consider. Oahspe made specific predictions about scientific discoveries that wouldn't be confirmed for decades or even centuries. It described planetary formation processes that mainstream science didn't accept until the space age. It provided accurate details about electromagnetic phenomena that weren't discovered until the 20th century. It presented archaeological information about human evolution and migration that has only recently been confirmed through genetic research. How could a 19th century dentist with no formal training in astronomy, physics, anthropology, or archaeology produce such remarkably accurate scientific information? Either John Ballou Newbrough was one of the most prescient geniuses in human history, or something genuinely extraordinary was happening during those morning typing sessions. The book also presents some pretty radical dietary and lifestyle recommendations that were way ahead of their time. Oahspe strongly advocates vegetarianism, not just for health reasons, but as a spiritual necessity for advanced development. It claims that eating meat creates psychological and spiritual obstacles that prevent people from accessing higher levels of consciousness. In 1881, this was considered extremely radical thinking. The book explains that meat consumption increases what it calls positive or aggressive tendencies, leading to conflict and war, while plant-based diets cultivate negative or receptive states that enhance spiritual perception. Modern research has actually found correlations between meat consumption and aggressive behavior, while plant-based diets are associated with lower levels of violence and higher levels of empathy. Also advocates what we'd recognize today as sustainable living, communal child rearing, gender equality, and nonviolent resistance to oppression. These were incredibly progressive ideas for the Victorian era, yet they're presented as timeless spiritual principles that will become increasingly important as humanity evolves. After the book was published in 1882, Newbrough gathered a group of followers called Faithists and attempted to put Oahspe's teachings into practice. They established a communal settlement called Shalom in New Mexico, dedicated to raising orphan children according to the book's principles. The community practiced strict vegetarianism, collective ownership of property, and innovative educational methods designed to develop both intellectual and spiritual faculties. Unfortunately, the experiment faced numerous practical challenges. The community struggled with financial difficulties, personality conflicts, and the enormous challenge of implementing such radical social innovations in the harsh desert environment. When an influenza outbreak swept through the area in 1891, Newbrough himself succumbed to the disease, and the community gradually dissolved. But the ideas in Oahspe didn't die with its author. The book has continued to attract readers and followers around the world, with various groups keeping its teachings alive through the modern era. Unlike many 19th century religious movements that either disappeared or became highly institutionalized, Oahspe has maintained a decentralized, non-hierarchical structure that reflects its anti-organized religion philosophy. What makes Oahspe particularly intriguing in our current era is how many of its predictions seem to be coming true. The book predicted that the period beginning in 1848 would mark a new spiritual age called Kosmon, characterized by increased spiritual phenomena, rapid technological advancement, and growing corruption in human governments. It specifically predicted that this era would feature more frequent sightings of spiritual ships, what we call UFOs, increased psychic abilities in the general population, and the eventual collapse of traditional religious and political institutions. Looking around at our current world with widespread reports of unexplained aerial phenomena, growing interest in spirituality outside traditional religions, rapid technological change, and increasing skepticism toward established institutions, you have to wonder if Newbrough's angelic visitors knew something we didn't. The book also presents some fascinating theories about consciousness and reality that align surprisingly well with modern quantum physics and consciousness research. It describes the physical universe as essentially crystallized thought or spirit, with matter being a temporary manifestation of underlying spiritual forces. This sounds remarkably similar to what quantum physicists are discovering about the fundamental nature of reality at the subatomic level. Oahspe suggests that human consciousness is not produced by the brain, but rather that the brain acts as a kind of receiving device for consciousness that exists independently in spiritual realms. This idea is gaining traction among some neuroscientists who can't explain how purely physical brain processes could generate subjective experience and self-awareness. The book's emphasis on the interconnectedness of all life, the importance of environmental stewardship, and the need for humans to evolve beyond aggressive, competitive behaviors toward cooperative, compassionate social structures seems incredibly relevant to our current global challenges. But perhaps most importantly, Oahspe offers a vision of human potential that's both inspiring and practical. Instead of presenting spiritual development as something only available to a chosen few or requiring belief in specific doctrines, it describes a systematic process of growth available to anyone willing to dedicate themselves to service, self-improvement, and expanding consciousness. The book suggests that every individual has the potential to develop psychic abilities, communicate with spiritual realms, and eventually become one of those advanced beings who help guide human evolution. It's not about worship or faith, it's about practical spiritual development through ethical living and expanded awareness. Whether you believe Oahspe was actually dictated by angels or was the product of Newbrough's remarkable subconscious mind tapping into some kind of universal information field, you can't deny the book's extraordinary scope, internal consistency, and prescient accuracy on numerous scientific and historical points. The story of John Ballou Newbrough and his angelic typewriting sessions raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness, the possibility of communication with non-physical intelligences, and the true history of human civilization. At minimum, it demonstrates that there are still enormous mysteries about our past, our potential, and our place in the cosmic order that mainstream science and religion have barely begun to explore. So what do you think? Could a 19th century dentist really have channeled advanced spiritual beings who possessed knowledge that wouldn't be available to human science for another century? Or did Newbrough somehow access information through other means, perhaps tapping into what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, or what modern researchers might describe as morphic fields or quantum information networks? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced anything that might be considered automatic writing or channeling? Do you think there's evidence for communication with non-physical intelligences? And what's your take on Oahspe's remarkably accurate scientific predictions? Coincidence, fraud, or genuine supernatural knowledge? If you found this story as mind-bending as I do, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we're going to be diving deep into even more amazing mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about reality. Next week, we'll be exploring the incredible similarities between Oahspe's descriptions of lost civilizations and recent archaeological discoveries that are rewriting human prehistory. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the truth is often far stranger than fiction.